to Bruce Bay. From there we went through Mai Tai and finished up at Paringa. We had various camps on the way down there. Most of us were all single in those days. And we had to fend for ourselves, like we had to do all our own cooking, as well as servicing our trucks and that sort of thing. It made you very self-reliant, I can tell you. We had various camps, sort of short-term camps between Karangaroo and Bruce Bay. And that was consisted of a walled-up tent on the back of the truck, and we just took it wherever we went. And that was included a bed or with a palliasse on it. We used to call them a palliasse. They weren't a mattress. They were just sort of a bit of scrim with filled up with whatever was soft. But I don't know. We were young, and I suppose, well, I was anyway, and you were there for a reason to. I suppose I was fairly ambitious, and I wanted to get on in the world, and I could see that it was one way that it was possible to do it, and it certainly gave me a start in life down there, no doubt about that. I worked long hours, and we had the opportunity to save money, as long as we didn't come north too often. We had a huge cross-section of the community down there, and there was all types, no doubt about that. They were all there for various reasons, and a lot of them were there for the booze problem. They used to get on it, and when it was withdrawn because they couldn't buy it, they'd get on meths and all that sort of thing. And one particular incident that I suppose is the worst that most impressed me was that we had a guy slashed his wrists, and he was my next door neighbour, and all we could do is to stick him on the back of the truck and cart him off north to the district nurse, I suppose, to be at Watteraa in those days. And that was, for a teenager, it wasn't very funny. Other incidents, such as some of our pregnant women leaving it a little bit late. See, there was always, the floods were our problem. There was no bridges. And, people's lives depended on the state of the weather. And the weather on the coast is very unpredictable. So, if there was, things were getting pretty serious and there was a flood in the river, and it was used to be, you just couldn't get out, there was no other way. And I had occasion to bring one north, and in an emergency sort of situation. And unless you had a heavy load on your truck, it's all very well, we used to waterproof our trucks to get through them. That was part of our job, and we could virtually have them running underwater. But if you didn't have sufficient weight on the tray of the truck, the tray would actually float your back wheels, and you had no traction, and serious problems then. But however, we did sort of go downstream again, and we drifted down, and we struck bottom, and at that stage the motor had stalled, and I managed to bring it out on the starter, and that was. We used to have good batteries for that reason, those ways. If your motor did stall, well, you could bring it out on the battery. And then it was just a matter of drying it out, training your oil out and that sort of thing. And if you didn't have a reasonably good mechanical knowledge, you stayed there. But fortunately, just prior to me going down there, I'd spent about 2 or 3 years as an apprentice mechanic. And that stood me in tremendous stead the whole time I was there. And it was when we were taking the trucks across the Waitata River, we had to build a punt down there to take the trucks and the loader across. And we could take 2 trucks at one particular time for each load, and we'd done 2 or 3 trips, I think, and on the last one we were running a bit late on the tide, and we started to go out to sea, actually, over the river mouth. But my brother Cliff was, he was in the launch that was towing the punt, and I was in a little inboard runabout we had there. I could see what was going to happen, and I actually rammed the boat up under the tray of the truck and behind it and started pushing as well as he was pulling. The war had started then, and things had become fairly seriously, and I was more or less manpowered down to Okura. My brother Cliff was already down there. He'd been down there for a few months prior to that, building the road between Okura and Haast. But they hadn't got very far, and I got down there and I helped him with that. But the main purpose of the exercise at that stage was to build the Haast aerodrome. That was because of that area, the whole of that coast between Nelson and Tyree was patrolled daily because they were afraid of invasion. And that's a part that I've never ever heard any publicity on, really. There's never ever been featured anywhere, but I believe that to be true. And the Haast aerodrome was built as a refuelling base because they were afraid in the aircraft they were using in those days that they wouldn't have sufficient fuel if they struck a headwind sort of between Tyree and Nelson. And that's why the Haast aerodrome was built as a refuelling base.
We moved our team down there and we lived for a short period of time in Cliff Hendy had a cottage or a hut, and some of the ministry works huts at Potter's Creek also, and that was for a short period of time, and then by that time we'd built our own camp at Paringa. And it was a delightful spot on the upside of the road with the beach forest backdrop. And I can recall the parakeets. You could hear them chattering in the trees, and occasionally you'd see them, the yellow-crested parakeet. It's a delightful bird. And we started off from there. And we grew as the scope of the road expanded and brought down carryalls and so on and forth. We had diggers. In fact, one digger ran some rapier we brought from England in the packing cases, and we assembled it down there. That was the bigger digger. And as things progressed, we had 2 units loading gravel onto the trucks, and between one digger driver and the other digger driver there was a bit of a competition. And of course the reward, one did 1,000 yards a day, I think, and the other one said, oh, I'll beat his record. And I think chap called Harold Packer, and he beat it by about 10 yards, and we had a beast of a day doing it. The trucks broke down, what have you, but anyway, he beat the 1,000 yards, and I think he did 1,010. And the reward was, of course, and I had to shout to take them all up to have a bit of a session at Fox Glacier, you see. So that was the inducement. But with those little sorts of an aside, it built up a great camaraderie, and there was always some competition between one team and the other team to try and do the best or to do the mostest and that sort of thing. But overall, we had a wonderful team of men, and they were loyal to the drop of a hat, and they'd turn their hand to anything. You'd delegate their day's work, which usually functioned first thing in the morning at breakfast time, and you'd set them what their job was for the day, and sometimes it would be shoveling pretty sticky material to lay a cold, or that sort of that sort of usual thing you get in road building, and always you're up to mud around your ankles, or sometimes much higher than that. There was a lot of forest had to be fallen. In one place it's so thick the trees wouldn't fall through one another, and I had 3 hung up. They wouldn't break through the canopy, you see. So what the devil do we do now? You couldn't do anything with wedges. And one chap got the idea, well, I know what to do. We're going to get a 303 rifle. And there was one bough you could see it actually holding them, you see, and he kept hitting this with a rifle, with the 303, and broke the bough, and of course that let the first trees come down, then we could start falling, and that's how dense the forest was in one place. And then bridges, we built a number of the bridges. My brother Mac, he did a lot of the pile driving, and so I think he was more on the bridging side of it, and I was more on the earth moving and the roading side of it. So We averaged over 1,000 yards a day for 2 years, and over 164 bridges and culverts went in 6.5 miles. In places that over swamp, I remember one particular place, I poked a stick down as long as thin stick I could get. It's 27 feet long, but it was still going down, you know. And we filled that mainly with a carryall, and we'd work all day, and we'd come back to start next morning, and all you'd see was a black, oozy sort of a trail left. But eventually we broke through this particularly bad place, and all the flax bushes and everything had heaved up each side much higher than what the road was. And you're actually running through a bit of an avenue of flax bushes had surged up with the pressure of the fill going down into the swamp, which is quite an unusual sort of thing. If you can imagine like a wall of forest, now you're going to build a road through there, you see. And we tried to limit side damage as much as we could, but in places it was unavoidable, falling trees and what have you. But every distance along the road there was borrow pits and roads going up the side to bring fill material onto the road. Imagine there was about 700,000 yards put in, so that's a fairly big borrow area, isn't it? But and I'm very, very difficult for me to go back there and find exactly where these roads were. They were completely healed over. The young beech forests have grown over it, and then they've vanished back into the forest, as it were. So it doesn't take long. It heals very fast here on the West Coast. One of the problems I think people from away don't seem to understand. It's the rapidity of growth. And it's a matter of only, well, there's, what, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, wasn't it, of that order? And you wouldn't know where these roads were. I can't find them. Many of the side roads where trucks were going up and down, and they completely merged back into the forest. So the damage what the environmental people say that roads cause is mostly a figment of the imagination.
Now, our reasons for tendering for this contract down in the Haast area were simply because the finance in the Canterbury area for residential subdivisions was having a tendency to dry up. The economy in 1961 was perhaps a wee bit dead, and we had a fair staff on, probably 30 to 40 men, and they were good lads, men who had come to us from school and had been trained to our way of working, good capable men, and we didn't want to lose them because of a shortage of work. So we felt that if we tendered for outside work and came away from our own normal working ground for a short period, work would build up, which is precisely what it did back home here. Work built up in our absence. We were fortunate we got this job down in the Haast Pass, and we headed away to it. Getting down there was quite a feat. We took down 28 to 30 men, and we took down 14 or 15 international trucks, and probably 6 or 7 or 8 earth-moving pieces of earth-moving equipment. The railhead in those days was Ross, and we railed the heavy equipment from Canterbury to Ross, and then the trucks drove from Christchurch. It took us, I think, 2.5 days to get from our yard in Christchurch to the campsite on the banks of the Kaw Creek, which was on our contract. And we had to establish, by that third night, we had to have our bunkhouse established, our cookhouse established, and then after that a little workshop for repairs to trucks or anything. The convoy going down there was probably quite a spectacular sight. All the trucks were painted up in our usual firm colours, and they had to proceed in a very orderly manner, a certain distance apart. Every truck was loaded with equipment, and good drivers who behaved themselves on the road. And it was quite a sight to see them going through. In some cases, the children came out of the local schools to give us a wave and a good luck sign. 28 or 30 men, all in the one bunkhouse. Bunkhouse was 80 foot long and rose down both sides. We just prefabricated it in sections, drawn a wee diagram and numbered the sections whereby we could lift them up and slap them together. Corrugated iron roof, corrugated iron walls. It was dry, that was the main essential, and it was quite comfortable. The cookhouse had a wee dining room attached to it, and the camaraderie in that cookhouse of the night, we wouldn't get in for tea till perhaps 8 or half past at night, and the camaraderie was tremendous. The work itself was a construction of 3.5 miles of roadway, and it entailed the moving of perhaps 100,000 cubic yards of earthworks, and I know there were 52 culverts on the job, ranging in diameter from 24-inch diameter to 48-inch diameter, and anything over 30-inch diameter had to be laid on a concrete bottom, concrete haunched, and concrete headwalls, parapet walls as well, and this was a fair job. We mixed all our own concrete on the side. There was no ready-mixed concrete down there in those days. And I think the gravels we used were off any beach at Bruce Bay or out of the rivers. So fairly primitive, really. It took a little while to get used to some of the West Coast conditions. Sandflies were a bit of a nuisance. You really needed 3 hands, 2 hands to do the work and 1 to keep the sandflies off. But we have found that if you didn't wash too heartily and left a bit of diesel around you, sandflies had a tendency to leave you alone. The rain took some getting used to. In one 12-hour period, we had more rain than Canterbury would get in damn near 12 months. So that really was a bit of a shock to our system, but strangely enough, the West Coast seems to dry off fairly quickly. There's a quick runoff and ground conditions dry out quickly. So things went very well. We completed the contract well ahead of schedule. We were away from our hometown, Christchurch, for 15 and a half weeks. We made no money greatly out of it. If you come to look at it, we were really lucky to make machine and truck rates. But experience-wise, it was well worthwhile. It was good for our young staff growing up in that they got a taste of working outside of their normal sort of working procedures and types of work. And whenever these days we meet one of our workmen who was with us on that job, the first topic for discussion would be the Haast Pass job. It was a highlight in the lives of many of those young men. We had I think it was a 25 kVA lighting plant set out in the bush, and an old diesel generator, and she would fire away there for 20 hours a day, you know, and they'd done a very good job. Until I think my brother Barney hung his wet pants on it one night to dry, and they fell down from where he hung them and landed on the exhaust and set the lighting plant alight. And I think we were without power for 2 days, so we had our problems once or twice. Being 60 mile away from a pub was a blessing. We didn't have any great problems. We never had much grog in camp or anything like that. We were all too busy. The last 2 weeks we were there in camp, we were working over 100 hours a week. The pressure was coming on to get back home. Generally they were doing over 100 hours a week, and I know my brother and myself and 2 of the leading men were doing over 120 hours a week. So the pressure was on to get finished and get back home.
When I first went down with the baby, that was a bit terrifying, knowing that the doctor was 2 hours away. And
Ellie had to go to Greymouth, wasn't it, to have her Hokie?
Hokitika.
Yeah, and I had to go out to Cromwell to have a baby. She couldn't have him. It was hard cheese if you sort of had to go out in a hurry type of thing. I know one lady down there had a baby on the side of the road in the ambulance. Luckily they were trained and everything was okay, and they had to take her through to Hokie after that.
I think
I
the
hadn't heard
idea,
of many, but
no, I
like
think
that.
the idea was the doctor was so far away. You know,
Most of them
one
had
of the
earlier,
experiences,
really.
Lorna McGeorge, for instance, she got appendicitis. And by the time they got her through to Grey, she had peritonitis. So.
it's a long way away.
And my husband had to run her through because Lorna McGeorge's car had broken down. He was being fixed and that type of thing. And